is there anything for us in Revelation today, even though it was specifically targeting 7 churches in the modern day country of Turkey?
Sure. Okay, so I think that if anybody knows anything from Revelation, they know about the 7 letters to the 7 churches, because
Mhm.
that's almost like it feels like you're listening to Paul or something, And so
Oh yeah, it really does.
it seems more familiar. But what people haven't recognized is the import of those 7 letters at the beginning of Revelation for everything that follows.
Mhm.
So Revelation opens and it says, okay, here is this awesome vision of the risen Lord, the risen Jesus. And then now that risen Jesus has a message for the 7 churches. And then it goes through those 7 messages to those 7 churches. And then the rest of Revelation from chapter 4 to 22, all of it is responding to the things that are going on in those churches. And I think when we read those 7 letters, they are 7 different churches with 7 different circumstances, but there are some themes that begin to crop up in multiple letters.
Mhm.
And so I think we can sort of have a sense of what's happening in Asia Minor and what the threats are to the churches there. So let me mention 3
Okay.
of the things that are happening on the ground. And let me say before I mention these, anytime I've ever shared these with a church, shared what's happening there, and then you ask the question like, "Is this relevant?" Everybody says, "Of course it is." Uh, there really is nothing new under the sun. So
Oh
here are
yeah.
the 3.
Yeah.
The first is that these churches are experiencing conflict or difficulty with those outside the culture and with outside the church in the culture. And that difficulty ranges. So in Smyrna, they're being slandered, and some of them are being thrown into prison. In Pergamon, they actually had a guy named Antipas be martyred.
Mhm.
And in Philadelphia, they're having trouble with the synagogue. They're being slandered. And, so you ask people, do you feel like that it is increasingly becoming hostile to live in this culture and be a Christian? Of course. That is one of the main messages that Revelation is written to speak into. So the second thing is that the Christians are being tempted to assimilate to their culture.
Mhm.
And specifically, the 2 things that are mentioned are that they're being tempted to eat food sacrificed to idols, and they're being tempted to practice sexual immorality. And there's actually specific false teachers named. So there's this group called the Nicolaitans. Like, we don't know who they are, but they follow this dude named Nicholas who's false teaching. In Ephesus, there's some people trying to be false apostles. Um, in Pergamon, there's Balaam and Balak, these 2 false teachers that have Old Testament names that are
Mhm.
leading people to idolatry. In Thyatira, there's Jezebel. So there's all these false teachers, but what they're trying to get them to do is say, don't really follow, God and the Lamb and their instruction and way of life. Like, let's just kind of creep into culture and let's go hang out at the temple on Friday night and do what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
Do we have a problem with that today, Christianity? Of course we do. And then the third thing would be in the midst of Asia Minor, these Christians seem to be complacent. And really, one of the driving things, explicit things that's driving their complacency in their faith is their wealth.
Mm.
And so in Ephesus, he says, you've abandoned your first love. In Sardis, he says, you appear to be alive, but you're really dead. But the one that most people would know about would be Laodicea, where
Mhm.
you're neither hot nor cold, but you're lukewarm, and spew you out of, the mouth.
Yeah.
But what gets me about Laodicea is what he says. He says, you are saying, so he's quoting them, I am rich. I have need of nothing. I have
Mhm.
prospered. Like, they're just satisfied and complacent because of their wealth. And he says, actually, you are naked. You are destitute. You are poor. Like, you are the complete opposite of what you think you are. And
Yeah.
so, do we have a problem today in our churches with complacency caused by the ease of our life and the comfort that we live in? It's like, whoa, what I
Just
came
stepping
to
on my toes, man.
what I came to discover in a book that I thought had no relevancy is
Mm.
this may be the most relevant book for our moment.
Mm.
And that's why we really need to recover the message of Revelation for this moment. It is incredibly relevant.
Yeah. To help us, like the segue here, to help us recover the message for
Yeah.
Revelation, what are some resources you'd recommend for people who want to learn how to read Revelation a little bit better?
Yeah. F- um, well, for church members, I always recommend Everything Bible Project. So
Mhm,
I love
mhm.
the Bible Project, and I think you could look up maybe their video on Revelation. It would help you. But if you're looking for a book for church members, I tend to recommend Michael Gorman's Reading Revelation Responsibly. And there's three R's, so good preacher points there. But
Yeah.
um, I tend to recommend that one. Now, for
Reading Revelation Responsibly
yes,
by
yeah,
Michael Gorman.
yes.
Got it.
Then I tend to describe myself as a Kesterite, a Craig Kesterite.
Mhm.
And this is my favorite book. It's by Craig Kester, and it's called Revelation and the End of All Things. And it is now in its second edition. I think maybe if there are some preachers that are watching this, you know, it maybe just a hair more dense than Reading Revelation Responsibly, but
Yeah.
this is kind of my go-to resource. And what it is Craig Kester wrote the major volume in the Anchor Bible series with Yale on Revelation, and it's like
Yeah.
2,000 pages.
That's a dense academic standard commentary on the book of Revelation, but clearly the guy knows how to handle
Yeah, so he took all that and put it in this. And so,
small
like,
volume. Yeah.
yeah, so I really recommend that one and think that one's just
Yeah.
fantastic.
For the sake of people who are just listening and not watching, Kester is spelled Koester, not
Yes,
pronounced Keister, right? That is something else. Craig Kester, Koester. All right, so we got
yes.
Michael Gorman, we got Craig Kester, and Bible Project. Anything you want to cap off the list with?
I think so. We didn't say to do this, but I just feel like it would be good to leave with an encouraging word for people from Revelation whenever we're kind of ready to wrap up, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, I think the message of Revelation in that moment, so right after those letters to those churches, the first thing he launches into in Revelation 4 and 5 is a scene of the heavenly throne and the worship that takes place around the heavenly throne and the lamb that's seated with God on the throne. And the reason that he does that is the message is you're going through some really hard stuff and you're complacent, and some of you are about to face some hardship, and you're assimilating to your culture. And the most important thing you need to do is you need to put your eyes and your heart and your focus back on the throne where the true authority lies.
Mhm.
And if you'll do that, then everything else will fall into place after that. And so I kind of cling to that message, and that's a message I share with our church a lot. um, we've just gone through this incredibly difficult year. And I think the message of Revelation that would keep us from so much of our fighting about politics and our fighting about masks and our fighting about all these other things is when we take our eyes off the throne and we start looking around us and we start listening to voices that are not pointing us to the throne, we're going to get a lot of things wrong.
Mhm.
And so I think the most important thing that we can do, as Revelation says in its opening visions, is put our focus and eyes back around the throne. And if our worship on earth is an imitation or flows out of the worship that's happening in heaven, then that's what God really wants us to be doing.